Hi, today we're going to look at analytical models for stock assessment. Well, we will start looking at the analytical models because this is a complex subject and it requires several classes to even start to approach. Today we're going to look at very basic models, but let me start by reminding you that analytical models are models in which the biomass component of the stock is divided into components, right? So production models or excess production models or holistic models consider just the stock biomass without any details or without breaking the stock, for instance, according to the size of the animals or how fast they grow. In analytical models, on the other hand, you have to take into account a number of factors. And today we're going to look at two of them, the most basic ones. One is growth, and the other is growth and the effect of growth, of individual growth on the stock biomass. And the other is mortality, the way that fish die, and then this is reflected on the stock also. So let me start by sharing the presentation. Here we go. So we will do in this first presentation, we're going to look at the different phases, the different concepts of cohort and the effects of the biological issues relating with cohorts, with cohort dynamic, and then its reflections on stock assessment. So concepts that you will see that you will come across while you're reading about this. So in a cohort is a group of animals that share something in common. Most often we refer to age cohorts. So that would mean fish, animals, let's call them fish to simplify, that were born in roughly the same period and therefore move through time as sharing a certain number of characteristics, right? And so when you look at a cohort has different phases. So they normally, if we're talking about fish, they normally start with eggs, and then from these eggs, usually there are larvae coming up, and these larvae will eventually turn into juveniles. And at some point at this stage, we will talk about recruitment. Now, we've seen that recruitment is a very elastic concept. People use recruitment in different senses, but you will come across this word. And then there is the recruitment ends the pre-exploitable phase and starts the exploitable phase, right? And then the exploitable phase eventually is composed of adults, depending on how you define recruitment. Juveniles may or may not be included in this exploitable phase. And usually also there are several spawnings when in the adult phase, and the adult phase will end with the animal's death. And in the process, the animal will produce new cohorts, will reproduce successively and will produce new cohorts. So these are some of the elements in cohorts. Now let's look at several aspects of the cohort dynamic. The first thing is that at some point fish die. Now, the way that natural mortality happens in fish is very different from the way it happens in mammals, for instance. Most fish, and I'm particularly talking about bony fish, these considerations may not apply to sharks and rays, but in bony fish, um, the usual dynamics is that fish are produced in large numbers, and then they have high mortality when they're young, and the mortality decreases as they get older, right? So they have this kind of exponential decline function where numbers decline very quickly when the animals are young, and then the mortality and then the number of animals dying decreases with age. By comparison, this is what happens is mammals is that they have a relatively low mortality when they're young. They live a long period and then they die of old age, right? So most of the mortality is concentrated at older ages, whereas in fish, mortality is concentrated on younger ages, right? So a typical cohort, typically the cohort numbers vary with a graph like this, vary with time with a graph like this. So many fish when at small ages, and then the number of fish declining exponentially with age. And this can be translated by an exponential equation, which gives the number of fish in a certain time as a function of the number of fish in a previous moment, multiplied by an exponential function where the parameter is z. Now z is reflects mortality, and you need to take into account that there are three constants that are related to mortality. When we're talking about natural mortality, we use the constant m. When we're talking about fishing mortality, we use the constant f. And if we don't want to separate between these two, or we cannot separate between these two, we use z. So z would be equal to the natural mortality plus the fishing mortality. And the effect of z is, as expected, to increase the speed with which the population decreases, right? So a small z would mean that the slope of the curve is less steep than a large z, where population declines very quickly with age, right? So that's mortality, natural mortality. Now, of course, fish die with age, but they also grow with age, and they grow in size, and obviously they also grow in weight. The equation that is typically used to represent fish growth with age is the von Bertalanffy equation, which is displayed in this graph. It is an equation where it is an exponential curve too, with an asymptote, which means that fish grow fast when they're young, and then growth slows and slows and slows, and it never stops, but it becomes very small as fish approach a certain size, and that size is L infinite, represented here, and L infinity changes with species certainly, but also changes for the same species depending on the place where the animals live. For instance, fish's temperature is a major factor influencing L infinity, and fish that live in colder waters tend to grow slower and reach higher sizes, bigger sizes. Another parameter which I've just mentioned in this equation is K. K is the rate of growth, right? So a larger K means that the fish grow faster. A smaller K means that the fish grow more slowly. And these two parameters have been used to represent most shapes of most growth curves in fish. Now, as fish grow, before that, now in this presentation and in these exercises, we will be focused on one cohort. But let me just introduce you to this idea that in many species, you have different age groups at the same time in the population, right? So you have animals that were born this year, and animals that were born last year, and animals that were born the year before, and so forth. So you have several generations coexisting. The same with human population, right? So at any moment, you are surrounded by people with different ages, right? Belonging to different age groups. Now, what this graph shows you is that if you look at the population and take into consideration all cohorts at the same time, you will see something like this. And the reason, and what you have here is the result of the two phenomena we've just looked at. Mortality, which means that the number of individuals in each age group decreases with age. So this is age group 0. Age group 0 is the age group of the animals that were born this year. So they're still not 1 year old. And then age group 1 is, of course, animals that have completed 1 year, so they're living the second year. And age group 2 and 3 and 4, and you see that the number of individuals in each cohort is decreasing. Right? So as they grow, because this is number of individuals per size, and so as individuals grow, so the cohort moves from to the right in the size graph, but it also decreases in the number axis because of mortality, right? So we'll get back to this graph because, of course, we are only going to look at one cohort, but you must remember that at some point, if a population is composed of different cohorts, then we will have the calculations will become more complicated because we'll have to consider all cohorts at the same time. So, but let's look, as I was saying, let's look at the effects of growth in size in biomass. Now, as fish, the growth in size is growth in one dimension. So the fish had 10 centimeters and now has 15 centimeters, right? But as fish grows in size, it also grows in volume. And volume is a cubic function of size, right? So as a fish grows in size linearly, its weight grows exponentially by a factor of about 3, because the fish is growing in 3 dimensions, right? So a volume of something, you have to multiply the bases times the height times the length, and you get the 3, and you get volume expressed in cubic meters or cubic centimeters, right? And so normally the equations relating weight with length are exponential equations with an index of 3, and they have some sort of coefficient relating the two variables. Now, what this means, if you look again at the individual animal, you will see that as the animal grows, its size with time, its size grows, following this function of this von Bertalanffy equation, so that at some stage size stabilizes, and of course at some stage weight also stabilizes, although weight has a exponential growth initially, and then it is asymptote. It tends towards this asymptote, tends to stabilize also. Now, when we put all these things together, right? So let me go back a little bit here to this graph, right? So mortality means that there's lots of fish in the beginning when the animals are young, and less fish as the animal grow old. But these animals that we have lots of them when they're young, they're also small, and so their weight is small. So their contribution so the cohort biomass, although there's lots of fish here, the cohort biomass is small because the fish are small. And as the fish grow, age, their number decreases because of mortality, but their biomass increases. And so the general effect on cohort is this, right? So you have the biomass as a function of time in a single cohort. The biomass as a function of time, you have the biomass increasing up to a certain point and then decreasing, because although the animals may still be growing, their numbers are constantly declining, and they're declining exponentially. And so, and therefore the cohort biomass decreases. So, and this is important for fisheries, right? You, just by looking at it, you want to target fishing in a size that maximizes fishery production. So you want to, if you're capturing animals that are too small, they will be you're catching the result is a small biomass fishing. If you wait until the animals are big, then you'll catch big animals, but a smaller number of them. So the biomass models that we're going to use, and I have this slide here. So the biomass models that we're going to use now consider these two effects, individual growth and mortality, and they allow the estimation of the fishing effort that must be done, and also the ideal capture size to maximize the biomass, the fishing biomass. So I will stop there because we're going to do some exercises, and I will stop this video now.